Good evening and welcome to tonight's cheer. This evening, it's Thursday, Parshas Chukas. As it's still light, I would suggest that we say a Kapitel Tilim for the Refuah Shlema for Chaim Rafal Arya Leib Ben Shena Dina, and then we'll put in tzedakah, and then we'll proceed with the shir. So if you're ready to join me, we'll say Kapitel Chof, and we'll put in tzedakah, and then we'll start with the shir. Lam natseach mizmor David, ya'ancho Adonai v'yem tzara, yisagevcho Shem Elahei Yaakov, yishlach ezracha mikodesh, umitzion yisodeka, yizkor kol min chisecha, v'yiloscha yadash neselo, yiten lecho chil v'ovecha, v'chol atzosecha yemale, v'ranena b'shuasecha, v'shem Eloheinu nidgoil, yemale Adonai kol mishalesecha. Atu yodati ki ha'ishia Adonai Mashiach ya'anehu mishmei kodshoy, Begevuris Yesha Yeminoi. Eila Vorechev, Veila Vasusim, Anachnu Veshem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir, Heimo Koru Venafolo, Vanachnu Kamnu Vanis Eidod, Adonai Heshio Hamelach Yaneinu Yem Korenu. Just a moment. It's money in stocker, and we'll start. So, Baruch Hashem, the campaign for the printing the Siddur is going very, very well. We're holding by 50, with including pledges over 50,000, so we're just about 10,000 short of our goal. As Hashem should be able to enjoy the Sefer Sforim very soon. Okay, so there we go. So thank you for all of those who have participated, and in advance for all those who will participate. Let's now start the shir. Okay, so in last week's Sedra, we have this story with the people were complaining about the leadership, and Hashem says to Moshe to take a staff from each of the Nisim of the tribes, and then they put them in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into inner sanctuary, and the one who's chosen, his staff, will produce blossoms. And indeed, the following day, they come in, and Moshe goes into the Oel HaEdus. V'hine parach mate Aaron, the staff of Aaron has blossomed. Leves Levi, on behalf of the tribe of Levi. Vayoytse ferach, vayotse tzitz. It had produced a blossom, and whatever the other details are. Vayigmal shkedim, produced almonds. I'm not dealing now with the pshat. I'm dealing with the trop, with the tunes. So we have a whole language of tunes, the symbols of the tunes. And what's curious here is on these two words, vayotse and vayotzetz, you can see this, each one has got two tunes. You've got under the vayotse, you've got a ma'apach and a mercha, and then also on the vayotzetz, it has also a munach and a mercha. And puzzling, what are these? These are not in every chumash. This is from the Torah Tamim, as you can see. And in the footnote in the Torah Tamim Chumash, he writes base tamim. So you've got these, whatever you call these little circles. So he says that he's acknowledging there's two notes on each word. So some of you are probably interested to know, what does it mean to have two notes on the same word? And we're all familiar that we have in the Aseres HaDibros, the Ten Commandments. There we've got two sets of notes. We've got what's called Tam HaElyon and Tam HaTachton. One is dividing it according to psukim, and one is dividing it according to commandments, and therefore the 5 psukim on Shabbos become one huge long pasuk, and Leisirtzach Alesinov become each one a separate pasuk. That's the Tam HaElyon, or they are divided according to psukim. Well known. Another place where we have two lots of timing is back in Parshas Vayeshev, or somewhere around there, Vayishlach, and somewhere around there. And it has there the story where where Reuven ostensibly slept with Bilhah, and then we have here a gap in the middle of the pasuk, and Yaakov's name also. Now there again, you see under Reuven, you have two notes. There's a Zokev Cotton and a Revi'i. Then you have a Mayishkav, a Zokev Godel, and a Pashto. And on Bilho, we have a Tipcho and a Pashto. And we have there on Oviv, we have both a Zokev Cotton and a Asnachto. And on Yisrael, we have both a Seif Posik and a Asnachto. So we have this idea of having two sets of tunes on the same words. And again, you're going to ask the question, how do you deal with it? So let's first deal with the one over there, and then we'll come back to our topic. And that is that we have this gap in the middle of the pasuk. So there's going to be two ways of reading the pasuk. Are we going to kind of respect that gap and make the end of the pasuk where the gap is? This is, I think, the only place in the Torah we have a gap in the middle of a pasuk. Or are we going to read the whole pasuk as one flow and disregard that gap? So that would make the difference of how the trop would work. So if it is, if it's one way would be Vayelech Ruven Vayishkav Es Bilho Pelegash Aviv Vayishma Yisrael. Then that's when you make that gap as breaking up the pasuk. Or you're not going to respect that gap. You're going to read the whole pasuk as one flow. Vayelech Ruven Vayishkav Es Bilho Pelegash Aviv Vayishma Yisrael. So then you're going to have the one set of timing is going to be as the pasuk as if it ends by Yisrael, and the other set of timing is going to be that the Vayishma Yisrael is just the middle of the pasuk. Okay, having said that, let's come back. What is the rationale for the two sets of timing here in Parshas Kairach? And furthermore, you never have a mercha followed by a Zokev Cotton. That never happens. You have a munach. So that would normally you'd read the that would go, but you wouldn't have a mercha over there. So what does it mean here, base timing? So I was intrigued, and I'm sure some of you, if you noticed that, would also be intrigued. And so where do we look? So one of the classic commentaries on this kind of question would be the Minchas Shai. So it's like a commentary, not on Pshat, but a commentary on the vowels, on the tunes, etc. So he comments on this, and basically, without going to reading all the details, he's basically saying the following. You have words which are mil-el, and some words are mil-ra, which means, do you put the emphasis on the last syllable or on the second last syllable? So for looking at the pasuk here, V'hinei, it's not v'hinei, it's v'hinei. That's milra, which means at the end, at the last syllable, that's where the stress is. Whereas in the word be'oihel ha'edus, you wouldn't say be'oihel ha'edus, it's be'oihel ha'edus. So the stress is on the penultimate syllable. So these are the two options generally: mil-el or mil-ra, the last syllable or the second last syllable. When I try to teach this to kids in school, I tell them, when it's when it's raining, you should take an umbrella. And what's an umbrella? Then you realize I'm an umbrella. Okay, so you understand but the way you put the stress actually whether people understand what you're saying or not. So in Hebrew also you have where the stress should be. What's the Minchas Shai is saying? These these merchos on the vayotze and vayotzeits are not really there to give you a tune. They're just to emphasize that instead of putting the stress at the end of the word, it's to bring the stress to the earlier part of the word. So it's not vayotze ferach, vayotzeits tzitz, but rather it should be vayotze ferach, vayotzeits tzitz. So it's kind of to bring it mil-el, but I'm not sure exactly. I'm sure out there are some people who are able to help you on that. He says it's like as if it's somewhere in between. He gives a couple of other examples. So you have in Parshas Vaschanan, Hashoma Om. So you don't say Hashoma, it's Hashoma. So there's it's unusual that the word Shoma is Mil-El. Then we have in Yeshaya, Oireif Kelem rather than Oireif, and Goider Goder in Yechezkel. So again, you have here where perhaps it's a bit of an unusual structure, but there are these exceptional cases where the emphasis is brought earlier in the word, and he's saying that. So I think the word here in the Torah Tamim, where it says Beis Tamim, having understood what we just said, it's not really Shnei Tamim. It's actually just a symbol to tell you to go Mil-El rather than Mil-Ra, or something in that nature. But it's not to have two Tamim mamish on the same word. Whereas in the case of the story by Yelech Reuven, there it's actually two options. And the same thing with the Aseret Adibris, you have to decide whether you're going to do Tama Eli and Tama Tacht, and there's clearly two Tamim on those words, whereas here it's not really Shtei Tamim. Okay, let's move on. So papaya fruit. Someone asked me this past week, what is the brocha on papaya fruit? So there you have on the screen, you have a picture of a papaya tree. And what you have on the left of the screen is from a specialist sefer on brochas called Shari HaBrocha. It's a tropical fruit, he says, a tall trunk. What's curious about it is that it's hollow. The trunk is hollow. What's more curious is that whereas usually fruit are growing from branches, here the fruit are growing from the trunk. So these are the curious things about it. In earlier times, it looks like these trees would be more commonly lasting only about 5 years or something. Nowadays, they seem to be able to last longer, even 15 years. So the question is this a Boire Priho 8 or Boire Priho Adomo? That's going to be one question. The other question would be, is it a tree in relation to Orla? Fruit of a tree are forbidden for the first 3 years. The papaya actually produces fruit within the first year. So that makes it quite untypical as a tree. So does it count as a Priho 8 or Priho Adom? So So we have here, again from that Sefer Shari HaBrocha, is bringing a host of poskim, where he brings from the Ben Ish Chai in his Sefer Rav Peolim, who takes the fact that it's a hollow trunk to downgrade it, that it's not a proper tree. It reminds me a bit of the banana tree, that it also is like not a proper tree. It says it lasts for 2 or 3 years, and then it dies. But that seems to have been perhaps in Baghdad. But okay. So these are generally there is a ambiguity about it. B'di'evet, if you'd said Boyer Priho 8 on a papaya, you wouldn't say the brocha again. But l'chatchila, because of the doubt, you'd say the brocha Boyer Priho Adomo. Now, I want to bring your attention to the Alter Rebbe in Birchas Hanenin in Perik Vov, and here he talks about what's the definition of a tree in relation to Be'er Priho 8. So this is in the middle of a discussion, and he says That is when you've got branches growing from the trunk, and the branches produce the leaves and the fruit. And they are not, the leaves and the fruit are not produced from the trunk, which is the hard element. But mine eitzim rakim, the kind of soft trees where the fruit and the leaves come from the trunk, those are not defined as a tree. By the way, for example, a palm tree does not have branches as such. It's got fronds, but there's no branches as most trees would have. And that's actually, by the way, why it's called a lulav. Sheyesh loy leiv echod. There's only got one heart. The palm tree has got only one center. Let's come back. So here we're seeing that the fact that the fruit grow directly from the trunk, that is a reason to say it's not a tree. However, this is not a solid proof for the reason being because the Alter Rebbe has said mine eitzim rakim. He's talking about trees which are very tender. So possibly something like a creeper. That kind of tree, I'm not thinking of things like raspberries, possibly that kind of, but the kind of tree which is not a strong substance. Rather, it's quite I think the word flimsy is not the right word. That's what he's talking about. That the fact that the fruit grows straight from the trunk rather than from branches, that would make it not a tree. If there's a strong trunk, as is said in the case of a palm tree, the fact that the fruit grow from the trunk in a palm tree is not a reason for it to be a priadoma. It still remains eitz. So that this alone, the fact that the fruit grows straight from the trunk is not reason enough to make it into Bari Prihadomo, but the fact that it's a hollow trunk and the fact it doesn't last very long, these are perhaps the more important factors in that definition. Then he finishes off, but if you have berries which grow on a ilon gomer, so then like a yagidus, black cherries, then the bracha would be ha'etz. Okay. It's just interesting, Hashgacha Pratis, that our first discussion was about a posuk of Vayotze Perach, Vayotze Tzitz, talking about blossoms and trees. And the second question is also about that. And actually, our third point, which I don't have a slide about it, but that is someone asked me this past week also about a blackberry bush. So reading that a blackberry bush is a bush which doesn't necessarily grow tall, but it does last from year to year. And the question there was, if it's in the way, are you allowed to fell it? Are you allowed to cut it down? Because the Torah does forbid us to cut down a fruit tree. It comes under Baltashchis. So are you allowed to remove a blackberry bush? So I did look around. I didn't see any source to say because it's a bush and not a tree. As I say, if you could eat blackberries, the bracha would be ha'etz. The problem is that blackberries are heavily infested, and therefore they're not really edible as such. From Yid, you could make them into juice. Well, again, that would also be not so poshet lahalocha to take blackberries and puree them, and thereby any bugs there would become also a bottle, but that would be going into Isra Ein Mavastin L'Isra. So I think I've gone through this before. For us to take infested fruit and make it into a jam, we're not allowed to do that because Ein Mavastin L'Isra. We're not allowed to nullify an Isur. Whereas if we buy the same blackberry jam from a Goyish manufacturer, so they did the bittling, and that's okay. So we're allowed to buy it from them. So what I did see, I looked around there's a sefer all about inyonim of health and in halacha. So there it talks about taking down a fruit tree. What if the fruit of the tree are typically wormy, inedible? So even there, some of the poskim say that's not a reason to justify felling the tree. So what can you do with this blackberry bush? Sometimes we talk about the idea of selling the tree to a goy, and the goy will take down the tree, um, so to speak, on his own accord. That we wouldn't rely on that on alone. That's obviously a shtick. Another word for shtick in Hebrew is haroma. So haroma would be allowed when it's an isud rabbonon, or when there are other factors. You would use that method. Possibly you could say because the fruit are inedible, and therefore there might be an argument to say, okay, it's inedible in any case, and it's a nuisance, and perhaps that would be a way to allow selling it to a goy, and the goy takes it down. But for us to cut it down directly, that would be actually a problem. I see here someone, Benjamin, is mentioning there are many cases of nosek ochar. It must be very unusual that an extra bercho is added. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Going back to the first point, that there are many times where a the emphasis is pushed from the last syllable to the second last syllable. So why dafka here does it have these extra the double trop? Yes, I fully agree with you. That's a bit of mystery to me. Maybe that way the Michas Shai was saying is like it's somewhere in between, which I don't understand what he means. Perhaps that might be the answer to your question. Let's move on. So last Motzei Shabbos. So in one fine Lubavitch shul, the Chazan, perhaps because it was Rosh Chodesh, he felt it was Yom Tovdik, but he went straight after Ma'ariv and Motzei Shabbos and said Tiskabel, and forgot that to generally say half Kaddish, and then we say V'hinoyam, and Yoshev V'seiser, and then Avata Kodesh, and then we say Kaddish Tiskabel. So what happens now? What happens? In other words, he said the later Kaddish. He said earlier. What happens? What Kaddish does he say later, or if at all? So here you have from the Piskei Teshuvos, who's in Simon Reish Tzadik Hey, the dinim of Ma'ariv and Motzei Shabbos, and he says that if he did say Kaddish Tiskabel at the earlier slot, so then afterwards he should say, would say V'hinoyam, and then he'd say Kaddish Shalom without Tiskabel, as is indeed the case both, if I'm not mistaken, the night of Purim, where we first learn Megillah, and then there's V'ata Kodesh. So then we say V'ata Kodesh is said Kaddish below Tiskabel, and then there's also Tisha B'av, but that's also for another reason because of Sosam Tfilosi. But this is what he advises. However, he says if he insists on saying Kaddish Tiskabel the second time, I got it wrong the first time, let me get it right the second time. So there are those who take that view. He gives it in the footnotes. He gives us a reference to his own words back in Kuflamed base, which is talking at Shacharis, where again we have a similar situation. It was after Tachna, before Asher Volotzion, and the Chazan said the full Kaddish over there. So he said Kaddish Tiskabel before Ashrei. So then the advice is that after Asher Volotzion, he'd say without Tiskabel, because Tiskabel Tzloisun means the prayer should be accepted, and that is primarily referring to the Shemona Estra. So once Tiskabel Tzloisun has been said, there's no point in saying it a second time for the same Shemona Esra. That's the position of the Sefer Beis Shlomo. Others disagree with him, and that's why he says that really that's his advice. Second Kaddish should be without Tiskabel, but if you want to dafka say Tiskabel, there are those who will allow you to do so. Let's move on. So Sunday was Rosh Chodesh, and a young lady was getting onto a plane on Sunday evening, and her skirt needed a couple of stitches. So there is a minhag of not sewing on Rosh Chodesh, and the question of the mother asked, is there any shortcut on that? Sorry about the pun. Okay, so now let's take a look. This is in Hilchos Rosh Chodesh, Siman Tov Yud Zayin. And it says here, in Shulchan Aruch, that Rosh Chodesh is a day where you are allowed to do labor. There are women who have a custom not to do so, and that is a good minhag. It's a praiseworthy minhag, custom not for women not to do malacha on Rosh Chodesh. And if the minhag is to some malachas they do and some they don't, so you follow the minhag hamakim. So the concept that women take a day off of their duties on Rosh Chodesh is well documented here. The history of this is attributed to the fact that the women declined to participate in the collection of gold for the golden calf, and therefore they were rewarded with a Yom Tov of Rosh Chodesh. By the way, I've mentioned this before. The Rosh Chodesh Musaf starts off with Rosh Chodoshim La'amcho Nosato, and it's Rosh Tevis of Rochel. Rosh Chodoshim La'amcho, Rosh Tevis Rochel, referring to, and you've got the three tefillas of that correspond to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then we've got Musaf of Rosh Chodesh corresponds to Rochel. Okay. Also, women have got a monthly cycle, and therefore the monthly Yom Tov is also a women's Yom Tov. So there is a concept of women abstaining from malacha. Cooking is allowed even on Yom Tov, and certainly Chol HaMoed, and certainly in Rosh Chodesh, but the kind of things which you wouldn't do. What exactly is the definition of what isn't done? So we're looking at a precedent of Chol HaMoed, and so, sorry about the pun. So about not sewing, weaving, and not doing the laundry. These are the basic areas which in times bygone, in addition to the cooking, they would be the main duties of a woman at home. And so Rosh Chodesh would be a day off of those pressures, and she would be able to relax and perhaps write a letter to her family in another city or whatever. That would be one day a month where they'd have a bit of free time. Perhaps go to the park, whatever it may be. Okay, so what exactly is the definition? So there seems to be a bit of a precedent comparing it to Chol HaMoed. So that coming back to this question about sewing a repair, on making a minor repair on Rosh Chodesh, I'd like to just say that my mother, Leah Sholem, used to teach sewing at the Lubavitch school here, the girls' senior school. And the girls knew whenever it's going to come Rosh Chodesh, there's going to be a break in that schedule, and then she would do cooking with them or some other thing. But that was part of the chinuch, that that Rosh Chodesh we don't do sewing. Fine. So now coming back to looking at Hilchos Chol HaMoed, and that's the value of discussing this. There's dinim of Rosh Chodesh and the dinim of Chol HaMoed. If a button has fallen off, are you allowed to sew back a button Chol HaMoed? So when I'm reading here from Rav Forkash's Sefer Chol HaMoed Kilchosai, he says when the absence of the button is a nuisance in relation to wearing the garment, or you're embarrassed to wear this garment with a missing button, and you don't have another garment or equivalent to switch to wear a different piece of clothing. So it is important for you to sew that button back. So he says you can do so with a shinui, with a change. And he's actually quite generous in the amount of exchanges he expects you to do. Number one, if it's got 4 holes, as many buttons do, then you only stitch through 2 of the 4 holes. If it's just got 2 holes, or some of the other type, the cloth-covered buttons, which are only got like a loop at the back. So he says you should sew it in a loose way, in a way that after Yom Tov, you're going to take it apart and restitch it. So he says that the actual sewing should be less firm than usual. He also says use your left hand to sew, or to sew it in a slightly off position. So he's quite machmir here, that even sewing a button should be done with several shinuyim. And so if that is the precedent, I mean, I'm not necessarily the case, but if you want to take a precedent from Chol HaMoed, would you be allowed to make these couple of stitches in Chol HaMoed? Really not so straightforward at all. Possibly if it were a pressing need to do a couple of stitches, but looser than normal, and in a way that it's not a complete repair. That's what it seems to be. There may be room to be more lenient on Rosh Chodesh because it's on a level of minhag, whereas Chol HaMoed is a din. But okay, so much for this point. Let's go on to an interesting question. Sorry, it's all these puns. Now, so here's the case. I gave a shiur online to a group of people on Sunday about ribis, and then I get this the next day, I think, I get this question. So what's the question? Two shluchim, and one says to the other, I'm a bit low in cash. Could you lend me $100? So the other shliach happily says, no problem. Here's my credit card. Go take out cash with my credit card. Now, the way things work with withdrawing cash on credit cards, apparently, that's one of the difference between a debit card and a credit card. When you draw cash, it's not free. With a debit card, it's free. But with a credit card, they charge a 3% or something. So what's actually going to happen is, let's say the borrower got $97 out of the machine, and so then, and he's paying 100, or he actually gets 100 out of the machine, but the lender, he's going to have a charge on his account for $103. And so now, either way, when the borrower gives back the money, his question is he allowed to cover all the costs of drawing the money out of the machine with a credit card? That's really the question, because is he allowed to pay his lender more than he received on loan? And that's normally a problem of ribis. So ribis interest, there's another term in halacha, agar nota. It's paying for your patience. I've got your money, and you want me to, I'm asking you to be patient for your money to get back to you. And for this, I'm paying you a fee for your patience, for your money. So when there's a time factor, that's where ribis comes in. But if there's no time factor, there are costs, processing costs, but not time related. So those do not qualify as ribis. And therefore, the borrower is allowed to reimburse the lender for those costs. So I'm going to read from a contemporary sefer called Teras Ribis. It's chapter 5, Gimel and Dalet. So I'm going to read straight into English. Expenses which are related to the carrying out of the loan, those expenses should be borne by the borrower, including, let's say, it will be sending the money from A to B, but it may sometimes cost a transfer, may cost a bank transfer, making a bank check, etc. Office costs which are related to the loan. So these costs, these are processing costs, and the borrower should bear those costs. Then he says, furthermore, that if the lender actually draws cash from his bank in order to be able to lend the money, and the bank charges just for the withdrawal, not because of time, just for the withdrawal, or I don't know whether this still exists, but let's say a check would cost 25 pence to draw a check. So who pays for that 25 pence? So again, this was saying these are processing costs, and they may be borne, they should be borne by the borrower. So it's interesting. I remember years ago we had this conversation with Rav Ephraim Padres or Habner Shleimer, and he wasn't so confident about this. He was saying, what's the difference whether you took the money out of an ATM machine or you took the money out from under your mattress? You gave me $100. Why should I be paying you $103? What's my business where you got the money out? But here they're saying, and to the contrary, the fact that these were expenses related to releasing that money, those expenses may be borne and therefore should be borne by the borrower. So this seems to be the common paskin, way of ruling on this. Okay, I see there's a couple of chats here. Let's go back. So, right, could a man? Should he ask? She could ask a man to sew it for. That's a brilliant idea. Yes, could ask a man. It probably would be an amateur job in any case. Um, right. Right. And so someone was also asking, is the reason for these extra stitches for purposes of tznius? Possibly. I don't know what they didn't ask me, they didn't give me the details. Yes, that would certainly be more reason to be makel, as we find, for example, even the Moshel, if a woman has a problem with hair sticking out, um, in fast half a tickle or a shetel, but she'd be allowed to trim that hair and it. Maybe sometimes there is this hair tail because it's for sneers that the rules are are different, more lenient in order to carry out you know, be more careful about other areas of halacha. Okay, so now just this yesterday, so someone he went out of mitzvah tefillin, he found a yid, and he put on tefillin with him, and as he's wrapping the ritzuas around his hand, and he sees on his palm there's an indecent picture, not snooze picture, and he wraps the tefillin around him, and then afterwards he came to in the Beis HaMedrash perhaps, and he was chatting, and someone told him, well, you shouldn't be putting on tefillin on a tattoo, which is an indecent picture. Now, this question of putting on tefillin on a tattoo, and it's an indecent tattoo, is discussed, like as far as I can see, in two contemporary sources. One is in the Sefer Shas Tshuvas Minchas Yitzchok from the Rav Weiss from Manchester, and that's in in volume Gimel Siman Yud Aleph. He there is talking about an immodest picture, and he says he's concerned that by having that picture exposed, he's going to be having immodest thoughts, inappropriate thoughts. Okay, and he talks about finding ways to cover it and to have small tefillin. Somehow that should be minimizing the exposure. So that's in the Minchas Yitzchok. And here we have in front of you is from the Yalkut Yosef from the Rav Aroshi, the Svardische Rav Aroshi, Rav Yitzchak Yosef. So he addresses someone who has a cross on his arm. So let's read over here. A Baal Tshuva who has on his hand or on his arm, he's got a tattoo of a cross or similar. He's embarrassed to put on tefillin on his arm because the tattoo will become exposed. So then he says he can put on tefillin in a side room, in a quiet place, and then pull down his sleeve and it wouldn't be so visible. B'shas Chag, he says if that's not possible, he does allow him to put on tefillin on top of his sleeve, but in which case he would put on the shalyad without a bracha and just make a bracha on the shalrosh. There is a Rashba, a tshuva of the Rashba, who says a person who's got a problem with catching colds and therefore wants to put on the tefillin on top of a thin yarmulke, which the feeling of the tefillin comes through to the scalp. He says that would be okay. So not everyone agrees. So if there's no option of putting it directly on the arm in a more discreet way, so he says he would be able to put it on top of his sleeve, and okay. But what we're seeing is that they don't have a problem. As far as chatzitza is concerned, it's not a problem because the tattoo is inside the skin. Yes, it is. Of course, it's not a pleasant thing, but right. So if it were the case of a Baal Tshuva, then this becomes the question: do they have to remove the tattoo? There's no chiyuv to remove a tattoo, but it would be advisable, if it's possible, with not too much pain, to blur it, perhaps. It's an interesting question. Is blurring a tattoo making another Aveda, or is it not an Aveda? I don't know, actually. So I'd hesitate on that. Okay, so, but there's no Aveda for him to put on the tefillin and to put on the tefillin with it. And okay, he'll wrap the tefillin. In the case here, it was on the palm of their hand. He doesn't have to put the tzuas mamash on the tattoo. He can put it earlier. But if push comes to shove, it is okay to put on the tefillin on that tattoo, as offensive as it may be. Okay, one of our regulars asked me the following question. He goes often to Hasidic shuls and probably Galiciana shuls, and there they make Kiddush Shabbos day with a small glass of Bramfin, of whether it's brandy or whiskey, and that's what they make Kiddush on. Okay, so there's two issues here. What about making Kiddush on something which isn't wine? But the question is about the volume. So we have here on the screen, you have from we have here from the Mishnah Brura. This is Mishnah Brura in Simaresh Ayin Gimel, I believe. And he talks here about even if you're using Chamar Medina, which you're using an alcohol, not wine, it has to be a revius. And you have to have Malay Lugma, which means the majority of a revius. If you can't manage to drink a revius or Roiv or a Malay Lugmov, and you only have a strong alcohol, then there's an option of passing it around so that between the various people present, the Malay Lugmov, majority of a revius, has been drunk. Okay, so that's the Mishnah Brura just doesn't accept this. As I say, this business of doing Kiddush on a small glass of Brownfin, this is like the Polish Galiciana custom, and we'll come to that soon. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring it, the Mishnah Brura doesn't bring it. So can we be Yotze? So really, the answer would be, according to our Messiah, no. Now here you can see on the screen, we have here from Ksos HaShulchan, Reb Chaim Noah brings from the Maharsham. The Brajana Rov brings from various Gdoilim, these are Talmidei HaMagid, who they did allow making Kiddush on Shabbos by day with a small cup of Bramfin. And he says, Poshut she'ein lismich al zeh, that we shouldn't rely on that unless you have no other option. Okay, so the answer basically is that no, we wouldn't rely on that. Where does it come from? Where does it come from, this business of making Kiddush on a small glass of Bramfin? So here we have in Siman Reish Yud, the Taz says, nearly the yains that the yain sorof, alcohol, the strong alcohol, which we have locally, is not included in the need to have a revius, because it's not, you can't, it's not normal to drink a revius, which is the volume of 1.5 eggs of a strong whiskey, is not normal to drink so much. He obviously didn't live in Russia. So now, in Russia, when I was there 40 something years ago, it was like cans of Coke. You had cans of vodka. Yeah. Anyway, and therefore, he says you'd go according to the quantity, which would be a normal drink for most people. And since a shot glass would be a normal volume for most people to have of whiskey, therefore, he says that's enough for brocha achroina. And consequently, also, they want to use that for Kiddush. That's the position of the Taz, who says that the strong alcohol, kind of because of its intensity, that makes up for the volume. Then Moged Avrom, by contrast, this is in Siman Kuf Tzadik, where the Shulchan Aruch had said that the shiur of wine is, some say it's kazayis or revius. So he says here, someone to say that on yain sof, on alcohol, also, even less than a kazayis, would be enough for a bracha achroina, because even with a little bit, that already is kind of enough to calm you down. And the Magen Avraham disagrees. He says you need a shiur of a revius, because there's wines also which are stronger, and there are foods which are strong foods, And with a little bit of that food, you can also have Yishuv Hadas. I'll give an example. You have one piece of chocolate. It's less than a kazayis. It does help. And still, you wouldn't make a bracha achron on one piece of chocolate unless you'd only make a bracha achron if you have a kazayis. Okay, so we have here, does a small amount of vodka, etc., justify a bracha achrona or not, and therefore does it have a bearing for kiddush? And we have a machlokas the Taz, the Mogen Avraham. So the Galiciana minig is obviously following the Taz. What's the Alter Rebbe's position? So here again, you have from the Alter Rebbe in Birchas Hanenin, Perek Ches, and he says you need to have a revius for bracha achrona. He says even it's a mashke chorif v'chazak, even it's a sharp and a strong drink that most people would only drink a small amount of it, as in the case of whiskey or vodka. He says that doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make it into justifying bracha achrona on a small quantity. There are those who say that with wine, they're kazayis. Let me finish on that point, that because of this, one should make a point, if you're drinking wine, either to have less than a kazayis, which is like, let's say, half a small shot glass, or to have more than a revius. Because if you have somewhere in between, you're getting into a dilemma. Are you obliged to say a bracha achrona for that amount? So either have a little bit less than a kazayis or a revius or more. Okay, let's move on. So we have here a question. So Baruch Hashem, tremendous chus that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch came out with Minhagei Chabad, and so now we have here in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Someone asked me about the about saying Shechionu. So here in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it says that it's customary to avoid saying Shechionu during the 3 weeks. Therefore, one shouldn't purchase or start wearing a new garment, because those activities would warrant saying Shechionu, which you could say nowadays may be different, but okay. If you have a Pidyon Haben, so then you would say Shechionu for the Pidyon Haben. Sheloi lahachmitz es ha-mitzvah, not to leave the mitzvah to go sour. What does he mean by that exactly? I'm not sure. Does he mean that to say do the Pidyon Haben on time and to leave the Shechionu for a week or two later? Is that what he's suggesting? I would doubt that he means this svara of delaying the Pidyon Haben, because that's a mitzvah min HaTorah, and you miss a day, you're delaying a mitzvah min HaTorah. So I'm not sure. Either way, he says it's expected to do the mitzvah now, so you also to do the bracha Shechionu now. Then we got Shechionu on new clothes, Shechionu on an occasion as a Pidyon Haben, and what about on new fruit? Fruit which has come up is now into season. It was out of season, now it's coming into season. Do you make a bracha Shechionu? So al pri yesh lahokil levorich Shechionu b'Shabbos. So he says on Shabbos you can, or on the weekdays if you won't have this fruit after Tisha B'Av. But these are the points we're focusing on for the moment. With a fruit, there's a leniency on Shabbos, or on a weekday even, if it won't be available after Tisha B'Av. In the notes here, we added the Minhag Chabad to say Minhagenu is to not say Shechionu even on Shabbos. So now the question is, according to this Minhag Chabad, of not saying Shechionu on Shabbos, what about if a new fruit is available and it won't last till after the 3 weeks? Can you make a bracha on that, especially on Shabbos? So there's 2 points over here, not to say about that you can say on Shabbos, or for fruit which won't outlast till after Tisha B'Av. And what is our chumrah on both points? So not so clear. Let's take a look in the Shulchan Aruch. This is in Tov Kuf Mem Tes, I believe, Neftov Nun Aleph. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, it's good to avoid saying Shechionu during this time, whether it's on a fruit or on a garment. Vidina ben, yes, because of not missing out on the timing of the mitzvah. And then Ramo adds a fruit which won't be available after Tisha B'Av. You are allowed to have it during the 3 weeks. So the story is not so clear here. What we do see in the Noise Kalim, in the commentaries, that although the poskim said that on Shabbos during the 3 weeks you can say Shechianu, the Arizal objected to saying Shechianu during the 3 weeks. Think about the words Shechianu v'kimon lizman hazeh, that we have lived to this moment. Of course, everyone is grateful. We're grateful that we are alive, and but to say that I'm enjoying the fact that I have this time of the year, the times of the 3 weeks, is not an enjoyable time, and therefore it's not appropriate to say Shechianu lizman hazeh. So the objection to saying on Shabbos is sourced from the Arizal. And that's the main thing which is being brought here from the Sefer HaMinhagim, which the Rebbe wrote. This is, in other words, the Rebbe wrote the Minhag in a contrast on Rishimas on Eicha, but then it was put into Sefer HaMinhagim. So the Rebbe's main thing is that if there's a doubt about saying Shechianu on Shabbos, so we all follow the Arizal, we don't say Shechianu on Shabbos. What is the Minhag Chabad in case of a fruit which won't be available till after Tisha B'Av? That is not clear, and that's why the note is keyed to the point of Shabbos. That's number one. A couple of points about this. Nowadays, to tell me that a fruit will not last till after Tisha B'Av, and therefore you have to say Shechianu now, is kimat non-existent. Baruch Hashem, we've got fridges, and fruit keep very well in the fridge for can keep for a couple of weeks. So to tell me it won't be available after Tisha B'Av, and therefore you have to have it now, doesn't. It's ashvacha. It's not really very convincing. The other point is that generally the whole idea of making a shechionu on a fruit which was unavailable and now it's in season, not that many fruit which that would be true. Many fruit are, because we import stuff from many fruit are available, throughout the whole time. You have to have a bit more knowledge of what's going on the market, whether something is now become in season. There are things like cherries, as I say, are available, they're not so available. But a lot of these more exotic fruit, for the amount of money you pay, you can get them probably throughout the year. They're really questionable whether you could say Shechianu altogether. Okay, let's not go into that. As far as I remember, there is in Igros Moshe a discussion about that, and if that was in America, in Europe, in England for sure, everything is imported, or many fruit is imported, and so it's just a question where it was imported from. Let's go on. What do we have left here in our list? So we have here 2 more points on the list. One is about Hamapil. So we had a discussion last week and quoted from the Tzanzarov about the importance of saying Hamapil and not being too worried that you might not fall asleep. Now, there are others, there are other communities, perhaps Galiciana communities or others, which don't say Hamapil with a full bracha because of the concern that you might not fall asleep. I saw that in the Sefer Minhag Yisrael Torah, and I have a recollection hearing from my Shver of Shalom in the name of Rav Pikarsky, also about some apprehension about saying the bracha Hamapil in case you don't fall asleep. But as I said last week, it's in the Siddur, it's there, and we don't have any guidance to the contrary. So the pashtus is there; it should be said. Right. One more point, and that is about feedback on using hot water from an urn in a non-Jewish hotel. So last week we had this discussion whether I'm staying in a non-Jewish hotel and there's an urn there. So the ones which are by the bars and they're opening their hot water dispenser, I felt that wasn't a problem at all because it's just psikresha, etc. But I'm talking to ask the guy to do it. But what about if there's an urn and you want to serve yourself from an urn? And I mentioned about the idea of Shema Yarba Bishviloi, that if a guy has cooked stuff for himself, but he knows that you're also interested, we're concerned that he may cook extra for you. So he asks, I don't understand. The urn was boiled, and now you've taken a glass of water. So when the guy is going to come and look at it and put more water in, he's going to put it for you or for the guy. You already had your serving of hot water. So interesting point. And the truth is, though, but even in the precedent, we're talking about, let's say, the guy is baking bread or something, and there are Jewish customers, and so they're also you're buying from what is ready made. But the concern is that he'll think that, oh, I have Jewish customers, and therefore I have to make more hot water or more bread, etc. So it may not necessarily be that the next time he fills it, he's going to fill it for you. But overall, he knows there are hidden in the hotel, and so there are more customers who want to have hot water. So he may be at some stage be adding cold water to boil because he wants to accommodate his the Jewish guests as well as the Goyish guests, and therefore I think the Shema Yarba Bishviloi still remains. What do we have here? So for those who joined us later, so Baruch Hashem, as said at the beginning of this year, the fundraiser appeal to print this Bez Hashem, this set of three Sforim on the Siddur is going very well. Although you see on the screen 42,000 Baruch Hashem, there's pledges which are past 52. So thank you everyone who has participated. You don't have to participate in a large amount, whatever you can, but thank you. And those who will participate, Bez Hashem, so thank you, and we should be bezocher to see this coming out. Korev and Yagdal Torah Yadir, thank you for joining us. Wish you a good Shabbos. And I'm going to say one last thing. That comes to mind now. Today was the yahrzeit of Rabbi Tzina Shem Tov, who many of us knew. And I remember one word from him, which I'm going to share with you now. And that is, what is the difference between a Zoriz and a Mavuhol? What's the difference between a person who is, how do you translate the word Zoriz, by the way? So, Rabbi, I just saw a letter just last week of the Rebbe, that you give energy to those who are energetic. So what's the difference between a person who's energetic and a person who's in a rush? A person's in a rush is running, and a person energetic is running. So he would say the following: a person who is a mevuhol, he's rushing to the mikveh, he's rushing to the davening, he's rushing through davening, he's rushing after davening, he's rushing the whole time. He's rushing. A person who's a zoris is rushing to mikveh, he's rushing from mikveh, but when it comes to davening, he does it thoroughly. So the difference between the mezoros and the mevuhol is in the unimportant build-up preparations. These things, they look the same. When it comes to the things which are important, so the Zoris actually gives it all the proper attention and does it thoroughly. Agut and Shabbos, and we should hear Besudas Tevis, I mentioned before, refer Shlema to Chaim Rafal, Aryolei ben Shein Adino. We should hear good news from Eretz Yisrael, Achenim de Yisrael, Shivyo Betzoro, and we should see the Geula Shlema V'Sechazeno Inenu V'Shuv Chol Etzim Barachmim V'Simchas Olam Al Reisham.
Amen.